Here's what I think is actually important for the audience to hear about this concept of failure. We always know when a decision happens, what are the consequences of the decision? Problem I see a lot of people do is they will reflect and like, I wish I did a different outcome. Because what they're doing is they're creating a version in their mind, which is predicated on no real evidence, and going, that would have been a better outcome.
Would you say you run towards problems now and when you see them in your way, or how is that different?
That for me is like,
Frank Greeff co-founded and built Realbase. He scaled Realbase to 350 staff and achieved annual turnover of $35 million. He's been featured in Forbes. He's a highly regarded business advisor.
We always knew from those early days that we wanted to do something big. And so what's required is to have an abundant mindset.
How do you plan family to what your future ventures are going to be now that you're going again?
Couple of parts to that, right? So one part is
the person that grew and scaled RealHub, that was in the process of doing that, versus the person I'm looking at here today after the big exit. How different is that person?
In so many different ways, it's kind of almost hard to boil down. I think,
Frank, the person that grew and scaled RealHub, that was in the process of doing that, versus the person I'm looking at here today after the big exit, how different is that person?
Fundamentally, I'd say, in so many different ways, it's kind of almost hard to boil down. I think what's required to go from zero to something is quite different to what is required to go from where I am to move forward. If I kind of reflect and go like, what are the key ones is, every single year you're in business, the ultimate goal is that you're growing. And through the trajectory of growth means new problems and new challenges. And each time you hit one of those milestones, it kind of feels like the world's going to end. You do it. And then the following year comes, but now the challenges and problems are bigger. And so the key reflection is, over that year, 10 years, and you compound that, your ability to juggle stress, load, emotional challenges is exponentially more.
Yeah. So you have a new form of challenge capability now, resilience. Would you say you run towards problems now and when you see them in your way, or how is that different?
It's interesting, and I think, now I'm kind of on that start of the next journey. The hindsight tells me, yes, I do, but I assume the next challenge is going to be really hard and really big once more, and therefore, when you go into them, you're like, oh, damn it, I'd really this is too big or too scary. But because I've also spent a lot of time doing the podcast, reflecting on the journey, you also realize that the only part that is interesting to someone to listen to our conversation is because of those moments, because those are the part, if I just came on and spent 1 minute to go, okay, this is a business and we had an acquisition in the end, that's very boring. But every time you have one of those things that's like an existential crisis, those are the things that you can learn and teach back. So I think now as I see new horizons and things that do make me scary, I often go oof, I can't wait to tell that story when I'm on the other side of it.
Yeah, that's really quite telling, I think. So I remember, Frank, just after you'd sort of done the successful transaction, and I was catching up with you on the back deck of your beautiful home, overlooking the ocean, and kind of so many things had come to bear. And we talked about how you'd run this journey where you'd lived really lean. Every dollar you had went back into the business. Every spare moment outside of your sort of personal and family circumstances would go into that business. And then we're in a situation where the money has hit the bank account. How did that change you when you now had abundance and choice as opposed to sort of a hustle that you sort of had to have?
I deeply think about the answers before I give them up.
Yeah, that's fine. It's no problem.
That's part of my process. The thing that goes through my mind actually is we always knew from those early days that we wanted to do something big. And so what's required is to have an abundant mindset. But also what's required is the financial discipline. So to the question, what has changed in me now that we have it, I think not too many things, because one of the things I was really conscious of is I was really nervous through the transaction. And I was really open about my friends around, I don't want the relationship, the dynamic, whatever, to change, because I wanted to, regardless of which stage I'm at in the journey, whether it be year 1 or year 30, whether it be you're a billionaire, millionaire, or nothing, I wanted to remain from a value set the same person, air quotes, the same person. And so like what's changed is, there certainly is no stress to make financial decisions, but also it's really easy to spend money. And so like you want the abundance mindset in the right places, i.e., okay, let's go again, let's make another venture, let's go big, let's go bigger. But you don't want to have like, oh, it's all good, I'll just plow all this cash in there, because the reality is that 10 to 12 year journey that it took is really, really hard. And so I have kind of almost like a baseline that I'm like, I will never dip into that. And so some of it's like almost a bit more of a scarcity mindset than I once had. So I'll explain it is, the air quote smart thing to do would be the money hits the bank, and now you leverage up and you hold on, right? Like, the end state to get to the highest possible number, if that was my objective, would be, still get a mortgage on the home, because now you can get multiple homes, you can leverage them, you can get rent to pay for them. I was just like, I cannot be bothered to deal with the stress of that. So I paid for my home in cash, and I'd have no leverage against it. Why? Because if all else fails, well, at least I have this thing that then myself and my wife and my son and family to come can be here. And that's actually quite different to what was required in the mindset I had in business, where, for example, in the early years, I had an investment property and it was like, sell that bad boy so we can use all of that money into the business. Where now I will never do anything that will put me in that circumstance.
Okay, so that is a pretty decent change. And, you dropped in family there as well. This has been something since I've known you for the decade or more that's been a big part of your time, even when you were planning, like a big part of your life, even when you were planning the family. What role does family play in your, not just in how important it is, but like how do you plan family in to what your future ventures are going to be now that you're going again?
Couple of parts to that, right? So one part is, the first business we had was all 3 brothers, myself, Ken, the eldest brother, Jacques. During the course of that, there's always ups, downs, highs, lows. There's very heated moments. And so at the end of that exit, we were never closer than we were at that moment, not because of the money, but just because, we'd been through something together. So the first thing for me was actually like, I don't want to do a business with all 3 of my brothers again. Because it's like I felt really lucky that we have survived what we did, come on the other end and could be really close. So now the upside of whatever monetary financial upside is not worth the downside of, but what happens if the next thing does tarnish our relationship? So that's one part. The second part is like my immediate family. And so I think about that as my incredible wife, Holly, my son, Oscar, and my new little baby in the oven, my soon-to-be daughter, which is very exciting. That for me is like, okay, there's this balancing act, right? It's, you could, in theory, I could stop working and then spend maximum amount of hours per day with my son, and how great. But then I also think about it, I go, well, what's the father figure that I want to be to him? And I think about that often. And I go like, he'll never remember the 10, 12 year grind. That'll just be a story that his dad tells, like almost like a washed up athlete, in 20 years time, he's like, oh, Dad, stop telling that same story. It's boring. So I'm like, I consciously want him to see, his dad, me, working really hard. And so whether they come in the form of, in business, or whether they come in the form of in the gym, like whatever it is, I'm more focused around how can I bring him into that world and life to help him understand why is it that we have a beach house. It's because of the day in, day out reps that we do to get there. So for me, like I've been thinking a lot about, and I'm starting to action it, is like at the right age, at the right time, is like, how can I bring him into my world? So, one of the businesses that we're invested in, we were doing an offsite for them. And so I said, let's host it at my house. And I had my son sitting on my lap, Oscar sitting on my lap. There's 15 people in the room and we're doing businessy stuff. He thinks it's the best time in the whole world. He's whispering to me, he's having a laugh because he's like, fuck, this is cool. And he gets to, like, I get to do the work that I want to do, that it drives me. I get to have quality time with him, and I get to hopefully inspire him, again, through every single day reps of what it looks like to perform at a high level. And so to kind of wrap up that whole question, like how important it is to me and how much do I plan? I wouldn't say a plan like where I have to go like weekends, 8 a.m., schedule friendship time, 8:12, have deep conversation with wife, right? Like, because my natural state is I just want to have an incredible life with my wife and with my family. It's always been a long-term goal of mine. For whatever reason, I just really liked it. Perhaps as from my parents, is I want to have one wife for my whole life is my ideal goal. And so I need to do the same way I think about like business, probably not the same way, but similar things like what do I need to do to be the best husband I can to make sure that is a continual thing that happens in perpetuity. So less like day-to-day planning, but more like I continuously think about how can I be the best husband and the best father.
I like that. Well, I really resonate with it in particular, how you've talked about showing the family or the kids that you're upbringing, which are part of your DNA, just what's involved in this journey in a present tense. I really resonate with what you're saying about being a bit like the washed up sports star or the washed up musician, talking about what it used to be like. I mean, that you used to be able to do that a little bit. Maybe a decade, 2 decades ago, it kind of still felt relatable. But even now, 5 years ago, it feels like forever. And so when I was doing something similar, I had an opportunity to exit my group of companies. I've had 3 now. And I've chosen to roll back in because I wanted to create a business that bucked the trend of not needing to be in that office every day, but have a true company that runs with the people within it and serves customers better by being 3 weeks away, 1 week on. Now, that was a nice goal alone, but showing the kids how that's happening and then relating it back to, because my 2 daughters now are getting to that kind of 10 and 8 sort of age. So it's like there's lots of questions. Some of the questions just blow my mind. So you made a comment previously about no matter how big and successful you become, no matter how much you're crushing it in business, there's a fear that doesn't go away. Tell me more about that.
I think when I shared that, I assume I shared that at some stage. The beautiful part of our content, people read quotes to me and I go, fuck, I think I said that.
It sounds like you, right?
I either go, wow, that's great. Or I go, oh God, what was I thinking on that day? So anyway, that's just part of my life. It's interesting because the first 10 years I'd heard the story from everywhere, as well as internally from my brothers around the concept of imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome being like, oh, I can't do that. And I felt really lucky because I never had that thought. I always thought, why not me? But over the last 2.5 years post-exit, what stood out to me as one of those things was I started to get it. And I realized that, okay, why is that, right? Because surely, I've now stacked all this evidence to build up enough confidence that I can do it all. And I think what happens there is the higher you rise, the bigger the mountain is. Now you're like, well, now moving forward, do people expect me to do the same or bigger or go bigger again? And then like my washed up and athlete analogy, like that genuinely went into my mind because I started doing, more content, more podcasts, people ask the story. And, I even had people in my network say to me like, your Frank Greeff capital to the world, is it as high as it's ever been and probably ever will be? And I'm like, oh, Jesus. Like, oh, that's a lot of pressure. So does it go away? I think everything is not as black and white where, if I answered yes or no, because everybody's circumstances differently. Does it go away for me? I think it creeps in. And so it's about how do you then deal with it? So what do you do when that happens? And so for me, like these days, when I get that thought, I often reflect and I'm like, okay, why are you having that thought? Like, what does it truly matter? And I always find, well, that thought's actually because I'm thinking about it from someone else's lens. It's not about me because I'm like, well, it doesn't matter. I'm just like, it's a journey. I'm doing all this learnings. It's more around what is the perception. And, as you stack and build momentum, you go like, momentum is this amazing feeling. And so then the thought of like a air quotes failure or the next thing not being as big, well, if no one knew about it, it doesn't matter. Like, if I still have the house, if I still have the family relationship, nothing actually matters. So then I go like, okay, well, the only reason you're thinking like that is because you're thinking it from someone else's lens. And I ask myself the question, like, does that matter? No, it doesn't. Because I think, having those doubts are good, sometimes because it gives you a bit of a check to like check yourself. But then I always think about like, what is the underlying reason and is that helpful? And if not, move on.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying there about how the fear can be a motivator. And, and milestones from my own career, like when I left the mining sector to go into professional services and real estate, whilst I'd bought and sold property and I'd done developments before I even got into it in my 20s, there was still that feeling that, well, are most people going to be just thinking I'm going to fail and come back in the mines and they're going to see me underground again? And I'd actually heard a lot of that talk about other people that had left. It was echoing in my head. So even though I was young, I sort of made a preventative thing there, and I permanently retired from the industry. It was mostly to get my long service leave so I could then put it into growing a business or starting a business. But those echoes did bounce around in my head. And now later in life, I use similar techniques. It's sort of like I try and call out the voice, like whose voice is it? Sometimes it's actually mine. It's actually my voice, and it's kind of like it's sort of like the cynical or the skeptical part of me that then I don't mind that one, because then I can say, no, I've got a plan and it looks like this. But if it's just an imaginary voice or it's someone that actually doesn't really rate a mention, then that can be a really good, valuable way to just sort of dispel that.
Love that.
Okay, so fear of failure, absolute failure, is what a lot of people are fearful of. And where the imposter syndrome comes in, that they're actually worried not just about not being able to do work, but they're worried about complete financial ruin, humiliation, top of the headlines, this didn't work out. But there's another kind of sort of failure that I feel is a bit more insidious, and it happens over a long period of time. And it's not so much where you lose everything, it's just that you don't gain what you're going for. Now, the way that we actually met was I've been involved in a number of venture capital funds and private equity over the years, and I was on the advisory board and invested in one. And I think I was introduced to you by that fund because they were looking at buying your first version of the company, which was RealHub, before you did the big merger. And so that would have been one of those moments, I imagine, that you were going for it, and then it sort of kept pushing back a little bit. Talk us through that one there so that people can, our viewers and listeners can sort of come on the journey a little bit with that.
So it was roughly year 5 of building our business. We probably launched the tech component of RealHub somewhere around a year prior to that. And up until that point, we had no idea what this world of venture capital was. Like literally, we thought business was this game of fundamentals. Is you get customers, you have a product, you give it to them, you get profit, you take the profits and you reinvest. We literally didn't know what venture capital was. This firm reached out and they said, hey, we're a venture capital fund. We'd like to invest. And I remember the conversation really clearly. I said to them, look, here's the deal. Like, we don't want to go through this process because we know the trajectory we're on, and the price you would have to pay today to make this worthwhile for us is not the price that stacks up in the numbers. And it was like, we know we're not worth this, but we know where we're going. And so at that time, I remember it very specifically, it was a valuation of $20 million. And they said, that's fine, we can do it. And I was like, yeah, cool. So we go through this process. The process is like a multi-months, not that intensive due diligence, but like at the time, it was really intensive in our minds. And for whatever reason, I was not yet a skilled negotiator. So I called them up because now I was actually quite excited about this because they had access to all these different customers that we want to have. And it was not only about the money, it was about, the signal to the market, as well as, being able to take all their customers that were invested in the fund. So I called them up. This is the stupidest thing ever. And I said, hey, we're actually really keen on this. The 20 million, it's just a far out number. So that we can get a deal done, we actually were happy for a $10 million valuation. So I halved it. Stupid.
It's a big change, isn't it?
And then, and it was just because I wanted the surety to just like, let's move forward. Let's not play around. Let's move forward, make it a number. Me and my brothers agreed. That was great. Multi-month process. And on the 11th hour, it was like, hey, it doesn't stack up. We'll offer you at a 5 million valuation. We could take 20%. And like, to your point, it was like, what was that? The feeling, I think it's like, it was one of those ones where, at the beginning, I knew that was going to be an outcome. I knew we weren't worth it. So therefore, I was trying to front load, go, hey, just don't worry about it. Let's not waste each other's time. But, to this point around failure, I never reflected that as one of those moments. There's many moments where I'm like, oh, that was a failure moment. I never even look back at that as a failure. I go, like, thank goodness that didn't happen, because I'm sure everything would have changed in terms of the trajectory of our journey. But I find it like, here's what I think is actually important for the audience to hear about this concept of failure. We always know when a decision happens, what are the consequences of the decision? I.e., you hire that person 3 months later, that was a terrible decision. The problem I see a lot of people do is they will reflect and like, I wish I did a different hire or a different outcome, or I wish I never engaged that conversation with that, that venture firm. Because what they're doing is they're creating a version in their mind, which is predicated on no real evidence, and going, that would have been a better outcome. But you don't know the consequences of that outcome. So if I reflect and look back at, the reason we know each other and the reason you became one of our first customers in our business is because of the connection. So there was still always little elements of it that makes that not a failure. It's just, that was just another building block that was required. It was also for us, it was one of the best things that happened because really early on, we just went, we will never talk to another venture firm ever again. Like there was a big part of our fuel in those first years, which is actually a fuel of spite, where we were like, they said there's just, this doesn't stack up. And I said with absolute conviction, I was like, we will be not the company that you invest in and you're going to get 1,000x return, but I know we're going to be delivering a 10 to 20x return. And the reality is exactly what I knew was going to happen. And part of it was always like spite. Like we were like, like kind of like, fuck you, we'll show you.
Yeah.
And so we did.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I can see now, like Ariana Huffington says, the failure is not the opposite of success. It's a fundamental and required stepping stone on the way there.
That's right.
So there would have been still some low moments along that journey, whether that was one or something else. Take us to a time when you're like, this isn't worth it, where I'm in the rock bottom.
When I think about it, I try and also think about the things that are unique in terms of that I haven't told that story before, because I'm always thinking about like, I want to make sure when the audience is listening, it's like, oh, that was something new. So I've shared the stories of like the deep moments in the deal or the challenges with myself and my brothers. So I won't bother going there, but instead I'll share what at the time felt like the worst thing ever, but now looking back, it's like comical, right? And I think that's actually a really important one, because realizing for everybody, like we touched on before, is that when you're in the moments, it feels like the world is falling apart. So I'll tell you what it is. So we got a customer, I never name names, but we got a customer who was a 12 office group in Melbourne. Prior to that, we'd never had more than one office at a time. And I remember I flew to Melbourne multiple times to get this deal, won this client over, and in between, kind of servicing that customer and getting a deal now that went from 12 to 80 offices, one day we got an email which was accidentally forwarded to us. And the email was, hey, everybody, and they were letting their franchise network know, just to let you know, we'll be turning off RealHub as of next week. And I then started doing some digging and I was like, what's going on? And what I found out was actually that customer was using us as a halfway house while they built a competitive platform, took all the information that we had to refine their platform, and we were always going to be a halfway house. Now, why that's important, right, is because, there's a term in business where people say, oh, it's just business. Like as a founder, or certainly from my point of view, I don't see a world where, oh, it's just business ever. Because the reality is there's humans on the other side. And I can tell you and I can remember is like the heart and soul you put into that, going like, this customer is the most important customer to us. We did so many things and stressed about so many things that when you get that feeling, you don't even get the respect of just letting you know this is what's going to happen. It's an email that accidentally gets forwarded to you. It's like, fuck you. Like, it hurts and it cuts like really deep, but not from the P&L is going to hurt. It's like an emotional, like, oh, I gave my heart and soul, tried really hard and I don't get the respect to even get an email or a phone call. I have to find out through this way. Because that is the blessing and the curse of business, is you are dealing with many different archetypes and many different personas. And some people do have the lens of me, which is like, this is a game of humans. And yes, there are decisions that we make that are predicated on this is the best decision from a business standpoint, but how in which you go about making that decision, you still always intimately understand there's humans on the other end. And the reverse of that is people who are truly like, it's business. And I think the emotional toll is sometimes not spoken about from these standpoints. We talk about, losing a customer and what that did to your P&L and the impact to your balance sheet, or like, hey, we had to get rid of 10% of staff. And then there's like the reality of like sitting eye to another human or getting it. And it takes like that hit in you and you go like the momentum we've built, all of a sudden, like I now have doubts like, holy shit, is this going to then mean that we're not going to get any more customers?
Yeah, I feel that. And having been through circumstances along those lines, and they're very much behind closed doors.
Always.
And this is what I was sort of talking about. It's not like a public failure. What you've described there sounds a lot like a sense of betrayal.
Yeah.
Which sort of sits for me on a spectrum up towards humiliation. You know, like it's that sense of having put so much into something or someone or a group of people, providing value, not necessarily expecting like some incredible amount of value back, but just, like you said, the decency. Now, I've learned a little bit over time to, especially with stoicism, which I've been much more into in the last 10 years, around frustration is a mismatch of expectation. Resentment is kind of attaching some kind of loss to that mismatched expectation. And betrayal then is kind of like when you've got a trusted position that you don't even need to hold an expectation. And then that person goes and does pretty much the opposite in what seems like using you as a bit of a pawn. So what was the catalyst that helped you move out of that mindset? Because you need to move on from these things. What did that look like?
I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure.
Well, maybe a tool that you use.
I definitely have an answer, right? I always trying to sense check myself that I'm not painting the perfect, connect the dots story. Here's what I believe, and I'm pretty sure, and it works for everything. If you put too many eggs in a single basket and you don't continue momentum, you will have a problem where something like that happens and it's a complete setback. Now, one of the challenges people say in business is like, don't grow too fast. And the reality is growing too fast can fundamentally fuck up a business. However, the positive side of that is the momentum that's happening in many directions then means that things like that become a speck of dust really quickly. So if you remember, I said to you, we had like an 80 office group that I was negotiating on. On paper, we were not ready for that contract. On paper, we were a team of 7. And that was like the magnitude and scale was 8xing and delivering like way more than we could do. But because we just continue, because we created that momentum, what it meant is the moment that was dropped, it was like you put all of your energy to make sure that this new thing is going to deliver. And therefore, you actually don't have time for the mental setback. And I think this happens, I see this often as people have one element of their business, whether it be like, I've been, tracking down this one hire and that's going to make a difference, or this one customer, or this one product or feature, and they put too much onto a single thing. If something goes wrong, which inevitably that's like the game of business, things go wrong, you're like, the momentum is completely lost because that thing that you're putting all your heart and soul into, it's gone. So you have to look at like continuous momentum in multiple areas. So therefore, when something drops off, it can be easily replaced.
Frank, I've known you to be a very purposeful person, which segues me to the name of your book, Eat with Purpose, your cookbook that you have done to raise $1 million for children's cancer. Talk me through that a bit more and how that purpose resonates with you.
So post-exit, I spent a lot of time reflecting. I guess the beautiful part about getting the money in the bank gives you a bit of space and time and freedom to think about, okay, what is the life I want to live? Who is it that I want to be known for? What's the husband and the dad and all of that stuff that I want to be? And I started to see different signals of, the way what is ingrained in me compared to what I wanted. And so what is ingrained in me is the high performer's dilemma, let's call it, which is everything is about like next biggest goal, 3 years ahead in time. Like this is going to be great when that happens. And that's my natural state. And then you have, what is it that if I reflect, I'm 60 years old and I'm looking back and I go, that was a great career and everything's been in harmony. Is the thing I want to have inside me I was so focused on next that I was never present with now. And so that kind of like sat on, for lack of a better word, I'll say my heart. It makes me sound very deep and mystical for some time. And I went, okay, that is not what I want. We've been gunning for this moment for a long time. Let me take a moment in time to let it soak in. Let me de-stimulate from what is required to get to that outcome. and let me do something that's above and beyond myself to tap into, the feeling that we all have, which is there's a real special feeling when you're giving. So let me extract that feeling. And so I said, I love building though. I love building business. I love the process of it. I love the creativity. I think I'd lost a lot of the creativity that is required to build a business when I was in the seat of a CEO, because it's essentially like you're just continuously getting shit all day and you're having to manage through that. It's not really creative.
Yeah, chief shit mopper. I often refer to the CEO. I'll have to get an acronym that lines up with that.
And so I went, okay, well, I want to do something, but I don't want it to be for myself. Let me do something that's above and beyond me. And so that's where, in a moment on a walk with my wife one day, I decided, okay, I'm going to have this goal to raise $1 million. I just literally created it for no reason. But of course, I'm not going to go ask for money because that's just in poor taste. And so I was like, okay, I want to build a product that people want to buy. Oh, and by the way, 100% of the money you spend is going to go to this awesome cause. It was like a 2-hour walk that this moment came to me. And I went, okay, great, that's it. Within a week, I called Kai and I said, hey, this is the mission I want to do. Mornings, evenings, weekends, will you come on this journey with me? And so I decided to do a cookbook because it was the creation of something, and especially something that I'm good at, which is food, is very creative. And the process of, whether it be writing it, whether it be filming, whether it be coming up with the recipes, taking photos, and the marketing behind it, that's all the stuff that gets me really, really excited. And so long story short, the cookbook's purpose is this for high-performing people who are health conscious and time poor. And it's all based around the kind of food I would make at home, which is just how can you put in this least amount of effort to get the maximum results with food you actually have in the cupboard.
Yeah, I like the philosophy minimum effective dose.
Yeah.
It's a medical and scientific term that's used for dosing things, but you can use it in many areas of life. And I remember Tim Ferriss referring to it in one of his books. And, it can go a long way, not just in food, but it can actually go a long way in building a business, 100%. In building a wonderful life as well. So why Children's Cancer Institute for who you're donating to? There's so many good causes out there.
That was kind of part of the challenges, which is I had this goal and I just used the word charity because I was like, to someone, not me.
Yeah.
And I'm really fortunate. I have nothing specifically in my life that I've had something affect me that I'm like, oh, that's a cause that I'm going to back. So I'm really fortunate in that position. So I kind of went on this journey to go, okay, well, I need to find what is the right one. And I just got connected by Matt Nicastri from Cunningham's Real Estate from all the places. And Matt said, I've just sold this guy's home and he has this incredible story. You should go meet him. And so I met Matt Weston at a cafe on a Saturday morning. He shared me this story about his son who was diagnosed with leukemia on Christmas Eve at the same age as my son that was at the time. And immediately, 2 grown men are crying together in a cafe. And I was like, yeah, this is the one for me. And he spoke very highly of Children's Cancer Institute. And essentially the cancer that his son had would have been 10 years ago a 90% death rate. And because of the work they've done, it's now 15%. And so I was like, okay, this is one that I can get behind and no person will speak, with more conviction on that than him. And so I will do the package up the product and, use his story to compel the mission.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it is an incredible charity. And I, as I've said to you during our conversations, I have a connection personally with Children's Cancer Institute. I started raising funds for them. The Build for a Cure campaign was where we went with our group at the time of real estate professionals, and we got a developer and a builder. And that was McCloy Group was the developer donating land, and the builder was McDonald Jones Homes. And then every person involved, every trade, every company donated their services. So there was this house that would be auctioned off at the end by Damien Cooley and us that would be sold, and 100% of the proceeds go to Children's Cancer Institute. I then went on to do diamond balls with them and other things along those lines. But what is one of the ways that the universe works, I suppose, with this is that my family actually ended up coming into contact with childhood cancer, leukemia. And it was a pretty big deal at the time. I struggle not to get emotional with it. But my cousin, who I'm pretty close with and only a few years behind me, him and his wife, Sarah, they lost their son, Benji, at about 2.5 years of old. During the pandemic as well. So it was really challenging at the time, but I have seen the work that Children's Cancer Institute do. And I was able to watch some of these families going through it, like at the start of Build for a Cure compared to the end. And sometimes you're seeing the kid rising so much. Sometimes you're seeing the depleting more. And then to still see that kid a couple of years later as they become a teenager, and it's now been some time, is just incredible. So, you know, I'm really, not only is there a personal connection there, but I can say absolutely this is a charity that when you lift up the sort of bonnet, it's what they say they're doing. It is 100% making a difference. We've got world-leading research here in Australia. I've been inside the labs, and I also have seen the families that it has supported. So like with that, you know, I know you've been sort of calling me out a little bit lately about making a donation, and whilst I've made them before, I really want to support this cause. So while we're on air today, I know you've been calling me out a bit. I want to pledge 100 books that we're going to buy.
Love that. Nice. Well done.
Yeah. So look, and I encourage any of our listeners, viewers here that like if you're in a position to buy this book, like Frank says, I've seen it. I received it as a gift recently myself from Pivotal, which I'm really stoked about. And it's a bloody good book. My wife is a retired chef as well. And she's looked at this and gone, these are actually really good meals. And it sort of reminds me a bit of the meals I have at St. Haven down in Collingwood, where I work from a lot. And I do my ice baths and my saunas and everything. They've got an amazing in-house chef. And these are the kind of meals they're cooking.
Love that.
Right. So like it's useful, it's practical, it's great for giving. I know ours is going to go to team members and to core customers out there and people that matter to us that we want to give this gift to. But more importantly, we're giving a gift of life to kids and families around Australia.
Love that. Thank you, Mark. Well done. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So, Frank, that's a really noble cause that you're doing, Eat with Purpose. I suppose aside from that, because it's a purpose very much helpful to many others and it is, you know, doing things like you've just described, how would you describe your purpose as a human on this planet aside from that?
I think about this a weird amount, which is lots. It changes, but I think in the last few years it's starting to crystallize based on the signals I get back as I put energy into the world, let's say. And one of the things I think I'm really fortunate I have a gift is usually when I enter a room compared to where I leave, the way in which people feel is different. You know, they're either energized or inspired or something of that nature. And so why that is, I believe, is because with the different stepping stones to success comes a person's perceived view of who you will be, i.e. they see the archetype, the persona, which is the big exit. You walk into the room and you're just a normal person who likes to have a joke, but also is like trying to run at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And so what that does is then help that person go like, oh, he can do it, I can do it. And so boil it down to like, what's my life purpose? Like I have a goal that spans across my whole life, which is I want to have a net positive impact on as many people in the world as I can. And how I think I do that is through business. I believe business is the vehicle that I do. And what I want to do is I want to showcase to people that if you can bring both impact and profitability together, that's how we make fundamental change in the world. Now, I'm really early on in that journey. It's going to be a long time horizon, but it's like I've met some incredible founders who have figured out like, okay, this is a for-profit business, but through every layer of the business, we create positive change, whether it be, hiring people which normally don't get opportunities, whether it be, the end state product is actually for people who are in need. And the flywheel that's created is because what's a for-profit organization? The more profit they make, the more impact they make. And I think there's this really interesting crossroads is like the key challenge of a charity and a charitable organization is they have to continuously ask for money. But if you can create products and people want to buy the products and you just expand a business and that business is creating impact, that's where I think things get really interesting because you don't have to go and ask for money. So boil all the way back down is like, I think I can be part of that change because I know in my heart, like I am not a for myself person. Like, of course I like big things and great things for myself, but I know that I have a giving kind of spirit. And therefore I know that like, okay, I can do this and inspire people as well.
I gotta think about my response to that. It's bloody good. I really like that, Frank. And I don't think it's weird at all to be thinking about that a lot. I feel like it's something that people don't think about enough. And so even if it's just that sort of wonder concept, you sort of get to try things on for size. And it's sort of similarly aligned to mine that like one of the things that came up for me is one of my business values. It's makers, not takers. We're makers, not takers. So we're creating value and then we're all getting a bigger slice of success as opposed to taking a piece of something that was already there. So instead of asking for something and getting good at the ask, you're creating something that's of value. And by definition of it existing or by virtue of it existing, everyone's getting the spin-off benefit of that. I think that's a really noble cause to have as your personal purpose. And it does seem like it's informing what you're sort of doing next. So recently, a few months ago, you started the Founders Table where you called together like-minded entrepreneurs, $10 million plus rev from right around Australia. And you connect these founders together in a way of sort of learning from each other. You cook for them. There's no charge and there's no fixed agenda at the table. So with this way of bringing founders together, is there a sort of deeper drive behind this? Like what motivated you to do it in the first place?
So post-exit, I started doing a lot of advisory work for other businesses. And what I learned is I love founders, not in like a weird way, but like I love the space of people. You know, there's a certain archetype to someone who can go start a business and grow it and has the grit and resilience, a tenacity that's required. And so myself and my brother Jacques, we started thinking about like, what is the space that we want to play in for the long term? Like who is the customer archetype or the persona that we want to work with? And we realized like we know the challenges of a founder and we enjoy spending time with them and there's so much more to learn. Why don't we make that our long-term horizon in terms of our next business venture? Now, as I share that, I guess the obvious ways to think about the new venture, people would be like, oh, okay, you're building a community and the community will be like a charge for experience and you'll do it. No. That's too obvious, right? And that's been done, right? That doesn't make it unique. The second part is, oh, okay, I get it. You're going to make an online course, educational and no. That, again, too obvious. It's been done. We don't want to be gurus. So the Founders Table, I guess the deeper element behind it, apart from just getting a little black book of having every single founder across Australia and the power of being the connective tissue to those places, the deeper piece is, you know, part of the how you get to join the Founders Table is we have a wait list. And the wait list is first name, last name, email, revenue, the company you have started, if you could solve one problem in your business, what would it be? And the second one is 2 questions that you could solve about your business today. And so, you know, within 7 weeks, we have 243 founders on that wait list with an aggregated total of some obscene number of billions of dollars in revenue, right? And so what we get to do is we are creating an experience that has no agenda. It has no cost. So we are in service to the founders at the table and being connectors. But the underlying piece that we get to, I guess the selfish piece is we have a data set knowing all the problems that all of these founders want to solve for. Our goal is by the time we get to August, we have 1,000 names on that wait list. You know, the Australian Financial Review just reached out to me this morning. They want to pick up an article in the paper for Saturday. So it's getting noticed.
Yeah, that's pretty noticed in the AFR.
Yeah, and so how cool will that be when we have 1,000 founders, which will happen, and we know the problems and the problems have parallels to one another, and we can start to go, okay, if we solve that problem, then lots of people will want to be our customer. And so we're front loading the relationship building. Now, many of them won't be our customer, right? What we didn't want to do is create a timeshare experience where come for this free holiday, you'll just have to sit through a 4-hour presentation at the end. Because I believe the moment you create monetization and commercialization, it can distract from the experience because then people come in with an expectation like, oh, I spend X number of $1,000, therefore I must extract this much value to make the return worth it. When they come in and they go, well, I didn't pay for anything. You're cooking for me. You're connecting me with all these founders. The starting position is like, you guys are in service to us. How can we help? And that's what we're trying to create. And even again, people maybe don't want to help. And that's okay because I think about things from a really long-term macro sense. How can I deliver this so much value that it is confusing to the person across the table? Because I know from a macro sense, rather than a one-to-one, over the long term, it is going to create immense value back.
Yeah, I can see the compounding just adding up in there. Like, you know, we've seen the value of building a CRM in any business. And like when we look at a CRM, customer relationship management. So like, do we want to have a relationship with these people? And do we want to manage it over a long period of time? That when we start getting deeper understanding of people without even using the word data, just a deeper understanding of that person, their problems, their goals, we can start figuring out what sits in between their goals and where they are now. And if you can help unlock those problems, like, I think that's very exciting. So is this a bit of a hint about the direction we're going in with our next venture that you're not telling anyone about?
Yeah, so I did an Instagram story yesterday, which was like, hey, we've just moved to our new office, ask me anything. I had 15 to 20, and you know, I said, ask me anything, 15 to 20, like, cool, what's the new venture? And I went, except for that, don't ask me that. And the reason why, it's not because, we don't want people to know so they can copy us. I couldn't care less about that. It's purely because I think about things from a leverage point of view, and the intrigue of people pulling people along for the journey and slowly peppering them with information will build, we're baking in the PR into this, right?
Yeah.
We're baking the story into this because stories are very powerful and what people are drawn to. If I tell you today, people are like, okay, cool, move on with their life. If I drag you along and slowly give you information, I'll have you on the edge of the seat. So that's the goal. So it's absolutely a hint. So the best way to think about it is like our customer archetype is in the founder space. It's really predicated on like experienced founders, and it's a problem set that they all share or a lot of them share. And it's not a course or a community that's paid for. It's a tech product built on our need for it. So Jacques and I came up with this, which is like, damn it, we have this problem. We try to look for the solution. It did not exist. We tested the market, so to say, and the same thing came time and time again. Oh, this doesn't exist. And therefore, that's what we're focusing on.
I love it that you're starting with a need that you've actually got because you're talking directly to the customer then. And it's a weird thing stepping outside of your own self to then go, what do I want? But I'm not talking to me as me. I'm talking to me as a customer. But it's exactly the reason that I've built a business operating system for real estate agencies that's business to business, because I've seen it myself in my journey of what we don't have, the things that we don't have, the things that we need to do. And it's actually one of the main reasons that's kept me in career rather than hopping out and trying something new. It's just I don't feel my work's done. So like, and I'm glad I've hung in there for the extra years because now I'm starting to see it come to life. I cannot wait to see yours come to life, Frank. Yeah. So before we cap off, like there's a question that people often ask in these kind of discussions, and I'm going to take a slightly different tilt on it. So instead of saying, what would you go back to your former self, and say to yourself, what I want to say is a slightly different variation on that. It is, if your young self was here today, not back in the past, because it was totally different in the past. If your young self was here today and you were coaching your young self on the journey that you're about to go on as an entrepreneur, as a founder, and also all of the other things that we've just talked about in life and purpose, what would your message to them be?
So it does lend itself to that thing I said before, which is like, well, you don't know the versions of what it would look like if you changed it, but I'm not going to say that because that's boring and we want value to the audience. Here's one thing I'm confident that if I did do earlier would have made a net positive impact. I was never a huge drinker and partier, but it was the standard Australian culture, which is at least every weekend and it's at least more than 4 drinks. I've cut that out of my life somewhere within the last 2 years. And it's made a fundamental difference to what my days look like. Because the standard thing is you do the Saturday thing, you go to bed a bit later, Sunday starts, you're a bit slower, you go to get Uber Eats and you're starting Monday with, let's call it 45% energy. You slowly build up to 85% on Friday and you start the cycle again and again and again. By changing what I've done is like I'm continuously incrementally stacking on or at least stabilizing at an 80, 85% energy rate. And I think if I was sitting across eye to eye with my younger self, it's like what you will get from doing that will not have any net benefits to your life. Don't worry about doing it. Like doesn't add any value because, hey, once you actually figure out after a few weekends time, which is you can have conversations at parties or out or at dinner or at lunch sober, and it's no worse, it's actually often better. What is the value getting from that? And I think compound that over an additional 10 years, I reckon that's pretty sweet.
I reckon that's an incredible and valuable takeaway for any member of this audience, including your younger self if they're listening. And I do resonate with that deeply. I think I'm going to cover that in my take, so I'm not taking anything away from yours.
No.
Frank Greeff, it's been amazing to be around for various milestones of your journey and to come back into contact with you now as you embark on something even more purposeful, even more amazing, even more holistic. I want to wish you all the best with it.
Thank you.